Well, I'm going to start out by saying my name is Oscar Schmidt. I come originally from the prairie. I was born in 1915 at a place by the name of Benton, Alberta, which is off the map today. There's not even an elevator left there now. It's the closest town to Benton today is Oyen, Alberta. And I left home. I farmed around Civil with my parents until I was 18 years old. And when I was 18, I went north to the what they call the Wasika country, in between Maidstone and Lashburn, Saskatchewan. I worked there for about 2.5 years for a farmer there by the name of Jack Allen. In the fall of '37, I left the farm and I come to Vancouver Island, and I landed in Port Alberni about late in the afternoon, and I went to what they call Camp A. And I'll sit down here.
No, but I mean, there's some things if you can't remember.
Well, I know. Sit down.
Please sit down and join us.
So
you went to Franklin River?
Yeah, I landed in the Franklin River about 7, 8 o'clock at night, and that was what they call Camp B.
1970.
I had a backtrack a little bit here. I had a brother by the name of Eddy, and he was already out there, and I looked him up, and I got a bunk for the night in the camp. And from then on, we talked to the foreman the next day, and I came in especially to run chainsaws, and the saws hadn't arrived because they come from Germany at that time, the steel chainsaw. And till they arrived, I worked on the railroad. That was all logging done by railroad at that time, high grade. They had the shays with the side arms and the pistons. Mm-hmm. They were some real tough grades in there on them shays that would pull a good load up them heavy grades, which is steam engine. They did have one steam engine for around the yard, for shunting, but not for going up in the bush. And worked on that high grade until about 6 or 7 months, and then the chainsaws come in, and I started to fall timber with the chainsaw, they were brand new. They were in an introductory program going on at that time, and they didn't know whether they would really cut the mustard or whether we would have to go back to handfall. And there was more or less an experimental stage. But I first started out with my brother, and we worked together for about 3 months. And then there was 2 other brothers working together, and so they split us up, and my brother went with the other lad, and I went with a fellow by the name of Les Davis. And we fell for 14 straight months, and we averaged better than 1 million feet a month for 14 months. And after that length of time, I was fairly handy with tools and looking after the saws. They asked me if I would care to go to Franklin River, not Franklin River, go to Menzies Bay at the Campbell River. They had another camp there, but L. Stewart and Welsh, and it was called Camp A. It was right on Menzies Bay. It was about a mile out of Menzies Bay, but it was all railroad there too. So I worked in the shop there. I looked after from 16 to 24 chainsaws, filed the chains, and done the repair on the work for a little better than about a year and a half. Then I was approached by a gentleman who was the head of the timber hog at that time. It was a duplicate of the steel saw. The war was on. They couldn't get no more steels from Germany. So in order, Don Smith got the brainwave that he would build one in Canada similar. So he took a lot of patterns off of the old steel saw and built what they call the timber hog. And they got me to come in to the factory in Vancouver, which I did. I worked there for all during the war, and I had 17 deferments out of the Army. That's what kept me out of the Army. Whether that I'd have been out, I might not be here today. But anyhow, I spent about a year and a half to 2 years all over Canada and USA with, Baltimore. I had 2 trips to New York and Baltimore. I had 2 trips to Toronto. I had a couple of trips up to Prince George. I was in Albuquerque, New Mexico for a month or 2. I was in Eugene, Oregon for 3 or 4 weeks. I was in Sacramento, California for a couple of weeks. I was just all around looking after mainly troubleshooting, because I knew the saws. I had worked in the factory and I had worked in the bush, and I was pretty handy at fixing them, so I was out there to keep them going. Shut it down for. I will, Ben. If you cut it on?
Yep.
Yeah, well, I forgot at the beginning. I should have told you when I moved from Campbell River to the factory of the Don Smith. It was Reed Prentice at that time, but about a year later it was bought by and renamed Industrial Engineers. Industrial Engineers, and if you look on the wall there, you see a picture, 1945 party of the crew that was in that. But that's who I worked for, and they're the ones that kept me out of the Army by deferments. I was told 6 months before the war ended, the boss come to me and he says, if the war lasts much longer, you're going to end up in it. I can't get any more deferments for you. I said, what do you mean, can't get any more? How many you had? And he said, this is the 17th and the last one. And I didn't know nothing about it up to that date. I've been looking for a call all along, but I had a suspicion that they were, but I didn't realize that they got that many.
What? Oh, sorry.
I'll take off. When
the mill burned down, he did.
No.
But you were
no. When I left Industrial Engineers, mainly for a reason that it was during the war and it was awful tough to get steel, and especially for the chains, to get the proper metals for the inside of the motors, and we built our own carburetors because you couldn't buy carburetors, and it got monotonous. I'd go out and I'd tell the guys, oh yeah, I'll get that fixed up, and I'd go back 6 months or 8 months later and I'd find the same trouble, and it kind of got me down, so I just left them completely. I just pulled out after the war. I moved out of Vancouver and I went to a town called Merritt in the interior, and I started falling for a living. I just forgot about chainsaws completely, and I just bought one and run it. Mm-hmm. And in Merritt, in the 4.5 years I was there, I cut around 28 to 30 million feet with one chainsaw. Well, I should say 2, but I mean in one operation. I just had the 2 saws. And the last year and a half that I was in there, I had a logging business of my own. I had 2 teams of horses, a logging camp. I had rented the buildings and the barn, fixed them up, and I had a cook shack and a cook, and I had a partner by the name of Jimmy Walker. I had hired 2 teamsters, so there was around 5 or 6 of us, and we were doing really good. And Jimmy and Walker and my partner Jimmy Walker and I, we figured on maybe getting a small cat later on, and things progressed. And we done good. We were really doing good, and we had about 3 or 4 million feet decked in the bush. And I had taken a cut scale on myself, and it was a hard blow because one night in the wintertime the mill caught on fire and it burnt to the ground, a long sawmill in Merritt. And it really broke Jimmy and I because we couldn't give the logs away. I had underskilled them purposely to have a nest egg when they hauled the logs. They never got the logs out. There was a lot of them rotted in the bush. So I had to get out of the valley, so I just sold the horses, sold the harness, picked up a chainsaw, and I thought, well, for a while I'll just go back cutting timber until get things leveled out. And I had to move completely out of there. I didn't move the wife out, but I left and I come to Nelson. I was heading for Cranbrook at the time, and I stopped here at Kootenay Forest, and they said, oh yes, by all means, we could sure stand some fires. That's how I got started here. Yeah, I first. Do you want to tape it?
Yeah.
Well, when I first came here, I went. It wasn't Kootenay Forest Products either. It was Looseholt owned it. What the heck was the name of it?
Is that Glacier?
Yes. Glacier Mills. Glacier Mills.
That's right, Glacier. Yeah, Glacier. You on?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, when I came to Nelson and I it was Glacier Sawmills at that time, and it was operated by two gentlemen. One was the general manager was a fellow by the name of.
Was it Vern?
No, the other one. The Duke of Boer.
Pardon me?
Duke of Boer's name. Shukin.
Shukin.
Yeah, Shukin was he was the general manager at that time, and the logging manager was a fellow by the name of Vern Vance, they're both gone. But they were the ones that hired me, them two. And Vern Vance sent me into the bush. And I had a partner. I had one partner left from Merritt. I had one man with me. Then we cut timber in Grohman Creek here, which is just out of Nelson here. I cut the first logs for the right of way up Grohman Creek. And from Grohman Creek, they sent me to Lardeau. At that day, there was no road to Lardeau yet. They had to ride the boat from Caslow to Lardeau by steamship to old Shukin, the one that's tied up in Caslow today.
The Moyer?
Yeah, no, that's wait a second. Yeah, that's the one. That was the Moyer that we used to ride, first until 19 come here in 51 I guess about 53 or 54 that the road there was a real kind of a cow trail through there, but they got the road good enough that you could drive it from and they cut the boat off and you could drive to Lardeau. They picked up the steel and you could drive from Lardeau by car then up to Trout Lake on the old railroad bed. And that's where I cut poles for first winter up there. I cut poles and the man up there was the foreman. His name was Jim Payette. I put in that winter cutting poles there, and then the next spring I come back and they sent me I cut some timber in Crawford Bay for them. I cut some in Coffee Creek for them. And a year and a half later, I cut some in Ty for them too. They went into Ty just for a small patch and then back out. Then they kind of jumped around the country. They logged the following year they logged in Lardeau Valley, right on the Lardeau River.
Mm-hmm.
You know, about say there was 3 or 4 islands halfway between Lardeau and Girard, you know, along the old railroad bed, and they used that railroad bed, like I say, for a road, and the logging trucks used it too first, and they kept getting spikes in the tires from the railroad spikes. The front drill would tip it up, and the back one, so they had lots of fun. But anyhow, we logged 4 or 5 islands right out in the river, you know, that a lot of cedar that winter. We had really good. They got a lot of cedar out of there. And from there, like I say, I went along. I had one patch of timber at Coffee Creek, up above Coffee Creek on the old mine. For 1 or 2 years, they had the Western mine. They rented that old mine camp for there, and they had a cookhouse there and the bunkhouses. That was about the last place I think that they run a cook shack. From then on, they had the one up in Marblehead naturally, but I mean that's the off ones. I think that was about the last one. From then on, they more or less tried to hire a crew that commuted from either Creston or Nelson or Coffee. You know, they quit the camp business once they got rid of Marblehead. See, Marblehead was their mainstay, and they logged up in Lardeau there for 5 or 6 years. But when I fell up there for them. But when I switched over from being a faller to the supervisor was in Thai. They had went back to Thai. They went in there beginning for just a short while, and then they got a bigger lot of timber, and they went back in for the second time, and they were in there for about 2.5 or 3 years. And that's where I quit falling. I was getting old and tired, and I gave it up. I went for something a little bit lighter. I was logging. They were using another mining camp. They were pretty good at using old mining camp, and they were using the one what they call up the South Fork, out of Caslow, about 8 or 10 miles up, and they had a patch of timber in there they had bought, and they logged that. And when they were come summertime, you know, and something come up that the foreman or that went on holidays. Well, then the second in command or the third in command, he took full charge, and you find yourself from a bullbucker to a manager, and you're running the whole outfit. You might have 250 men, but you don't only look after the foliage, you look after the complete layout for a couple of weeks.
Did that happen to you there?
It happened to me, and it happened to me in the South Fork, and it happened to me in the Lardeau too for a week or two. Well, I mean, once you're foreman and you get to know the whole layout, well then naturally you can take full charge if you have to for a short while. And another thing, once you're a supervisor, you just get home in the middle of the summer and from Lardeau, and you haven't had time to have your dinner yet, and you get a phone call that the lightning's blazing around here, the fires are going, so come on back. So you might go back, and you might not even see another shut-eye for 3 days and 3 nights. Yes, go as long as the fires are going. There's very little break. You go until you're about next to drop.
Were you fighting fires mainly on the
Well,
KFP?
you look after the crews. You bet your life. And many a fire I was on. In the 12 years I was up there, I must have been on 25 or 30 fires. Yeah, that's, you don't, I maybe didn't do too much fighting with that, but you took your crew of fallers out because I looked after them, and I might have 15 or 20 of my men out there falling nothing but snags and fire guards and whatever it takes.
Mm-hmm. Would that be primarily on KFP's own private land, or would
Not
you be
private land, but on their timber right land.
Yeah.
You know, there's very little of that land that the Kootenay Force actually owned the land. They just had the timber rights.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Another interesting thing that I might mention was when I told you about, I cut the first road up Grohman Creek. Well, then later on, see, they got the brainwave that they would try high lead in this country.
Mm-hmm.
So they got a spar tree, and Wally got his rigging crew together, and they went up Grohman Creek, and I cut timber up there for them before I ever started being foreman. I cut timber up them for about 6 weeks, and way up at the far end of the road in Grohman, and I call that the last log that was up there. I cut the first one for the right of way, and I cut the last one for the high lead up there. They tried the high lead out, but the high lead didn't pan out in this country too well because there's not enough concentration. There's not enough millions in one valley to warrant the setting up of a big high lead outfit. It's too scattered.
What kind of equipment did they bring up?
Well, he set up a spar tree, and they had the whole bit, and they skidded them down the mountain instead of with cats and skidders. They used what they call the high lead, mm-hmm. But it's too scattered the timber in this country. Didn't pay off. Just too. They couldn't have forced after Wally had left later on. Wally was gone. They tried two steel bars they bought, you know, the big ones where you drive them along the road, just put down the pads and put out the guy lines, and they went broke too. That was about the time that I was finished at Kootenay Force myself. But they had them two rigs, but they never paid off. They were just no good in this country. The only thing that would pay off in this country at high lead was what they called a jammer. They had two drums on a jammer, and they could go down on some bad draws, especially on the lower side of the road, not so much up above, but the lower side of the road, and they could bring up all them logs, you know, out of and it was easily moved and fast to set up, and it worked on a high lead. But it's not a high lead, but it's more what they call a slack line. Mm-hmm. It had a back and forth, and a tail hold down there, and they just keep moving. The one that got that, they take maybe a strip 40 feet wide or 50 feet wide, and then when that was all the logs picked up out of that strip, they just move the tail hold over another 40, 50, or 60 feet, whichever is necessary, and to another stump, and then they clean that up, and they could log some real bad ground fairly cheap with jammers. But a high lead to set up a spar tree and on all the heavy rigging that it took, there was no money in it. Mm.
Did they try it in the Lardeau as well?
Yeah, that's where they tried the steel spars. They tried it in Lardeau, and they tried it in Coffee Creek, or in not Coffee Creek, but
Crawford Bay.
Crawford Bay, yeah, mm-hmm. On that bad ground back in behind there, you know. But it wasn't successful. They just too much money, too many men for the quantity of logs on on the coast. Just for comparison, on the coast, if they set up in one valley, there might be 20 million feet of timber. here you'd need 20 valleys to get 1 million. So that's just the difference, you know. So that would never pay off. The high lead in this country is there's not a heavy enough concentration of timber for a high lead. Jammers, yes, jammers work good. Skidders and cats are the mainstay.
Why did they try it? Were they running out of timber on the?
Oh no, that's more or less. It's more or less the superintendent that they had at that time. He was gonna show them how to log, and he showed them how to go broke. That's all he done.
When did you retire from KFP, or did you move on elsewhere?
No, I was a fellow that come in here that done all the damage. There's no use naming names, but he's the one that he let all the crew go. He wanted nothing but college guys, and he got all the college men, and he got nothing, and he got 2 spiel spars, and they went broke. So they come from the east and run him right out of the office. That's what happened. But when I quit, when I was shut off from Kootenay Forest, I bought a small business down on the waterfront, which Sean Lamb knows, that I bought out McDonald and I had sold chainsaws and had a repair shop down there for 5 years on the waterfront, run under the name of Oscar's Two-Cycle Service and Marine. I done chainsaws, garden tractors, lawnmowers, and on every type of outboard motor that was ever made, I got her. So I mean, that's what I done for 5 years. And after I sold out down there, I made the mistake when I started out there. I started working about 16 hours a day and 7 days a week, and I'm telling you, after 5 years of that, I got so cranky, I rolled up my arms, sleeves, I'd bite my own arm. I mean, so I sold out, and I went out and I worked at Rainbow Lodge at Balfour, and I put in about 10 years out there. Just in the summertime and wintertime, I didn't do anything. I slack out there, and I worked there for until I retired, and then I quit. I worked from the time up till I was about 70 years old, so I figured it's time to cash in.
Was the work for KFP as faller was seasonal, so you wouldn't be working 12 months a year for them? When I fell for KFP, it was pretty well the year round.
Oh,
is that right?
Oh yeah, the biggest layoff that KFP had was in the breakup season.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as the winter work is concerned, no. When I supervised, I worked all winter. I worked all summer. The only time I had off was break-off time. That was holiday time. Mm-hmm. When I was mud up to there, then that's when you had your holidays.
Huh.
And when I was falling for them, if you wanted to fall all winter, you could fall in the snow. I fell in 10, 12 feet of snow, filled with snowshoes. I shoveled down stumps down, but a lot of places they don't bother shoveling it now. Well, they maybe do more shoveling now than they used to, but they don't log in the wintertime like they did years ago, because the timber's far further back now. There's nothing left down close. The timber's all further back. There's still millions and millions of acres of timber in British Columbia, but it's back away from the roads, and it costs money to put roads too, so therefore they're not logged. These people that say there's no logs, there's all kinds of logs. All you have to do is get on a helicopter or airplane, and you fly around and look, and you've got to look awful close to see where there's been any logging. I mean, there's so much timber that, but it's all back. It's all back away. Mm-hmm. It's not easy to get at, and there's no heavy concentrations left. There may be 100 million here. There might be 3 million in the next valley. There might be 500,000 up and drift spots, but no heavy concentration. But there's lots of timber left. but not in one spot.
Mm.
They logged all the lower stuff out. It was easy to get at.
When you were falling in the winter, you were just talking about digging down so that you could get the stump lower.
Some places, it all depends. It all depends a lot on what the reading was on the sale on that particular patch of timber. Some places, if it was half decent ground, they insisted on the stumps being low. Then if the company wanted to log it in the wintertime, they had to shovel to get down, on a half decent stump. Like, I've got a friend of mine that used to log out of Merritt in the Coquihalla, and he logged on top of the crust in the spring, 25 to 30 feet of snow, and they cut the timber off there, and when the snow was gone, there was one log left in all the trees. But you couldn't do that nowadays, but they got away with it in them days.
When you were down in the snow like that, when the trees started to fall, you'd have had a fair...
Well, I'm telling you, it was dangerous work if you shoveled yourself down. If they would say 4 feet of snow wasn't bad, but if there was 10 feet of snow and you shoveled down 6 or 7 feet around the tree, then you had to make yourself a ladder to get out of there, because when the tree starts to go, you get out. See?
Did you ever get caught?
Well, I never did do too much shovel falling, but I have done enough that I've been down in there, and I got out of there fast because you usually got snowshoes, so you got your snowshoes off while you're falling, so you make 2 steps, and you put your snowshoes in them. See, and when your tree starts to go, you just step from one, jump from one to the other, and you're up on top, and you're free. See. You got to get out of there. There's been the odd man hurt that way. Better shut her down for a while. Yeah, well, when you're supervising that way, and especially when I looked after the fallers, there was two men killed in Lardeau. There was one man killed in Coffee Creek that I helped back out of the bush. It's not very nice, but it's one of those things that happen. The one in the Lardeau, I'll tell this story because I told it at the loggers at the coroner's inquest. They had that he was an awful good man. There was 2 of them. There was 2 brothers, and they used to take on the odd snifty, And Friday night, he was a very careful faller, but for some reason he had crisscrossed his timber, and he had more or less, I say, set up a real trap. And Monday morning when he come back to work, well, he had maybe a little bit of a hangover. I wouldn't say he was drunk, but he maybe had a little bit of effects. I don't think his head was quite as clear as it could have been. And he walked right into the trap on Monday morning and killed himself. The trap that he had set up on Friday night when he left. Because he went in there and he fell a tree out across there, went out to bucket, and when he cut the cut off there, it rolled the log. It was up on the stump behind him. The stump that rolled off of the stump when the draw shook. It shook the log that was behind him. Instead of him taking that off the stump, he went under it, and it down and nailed his head right between 2 logs, about 30 inches through. When I found him, he was hanging there. I had to cut the log off, drop him down. Things like that happened. That was one of them. The other one was killed in. He was further up. He was just out of Howser, about 2 miles out of Howser. If you know where Howser is, and that a cottonwood limb come down. He was just walking from one tree to the other, and a cottonwood limb just come down and nailed him, and they found him was right under it. But I mean, that's some of the natural disasters that goes with the game as far as I'm concerned. The only way you can prevent, like I used to put on the compensation strips, if you're going to prevent them completely, you've got to stay out of the bush. There's a certain amount of safety, and you do safe working, but I mean, you can't prevent accidents as long as the bush is full of men. There's bound to be the odd accident, just the same as there is in all buildings. Every once in a while you hear of 5 or 6 guys being killed on some platform. The rope broke or the cable broke, or always some excuse, but could have been prevented if it was seen ahead of time.
Were there union crews and contractors as well?
Union, we contract fell for up till the last 2 years that I supervised for Kootenay Forest. There was pretty much day wages, but before that it was all contract. When I mentioned in the tape that I had set the prices, well, that was all contract work. After they went into day work, well, it was no longer any price setting. Was just they just paid so much a day, which spoiled the logging as far as I'm concerned. But a lot of union men figured that they should be able to make money without working too hard.
Were there union crews in the woods initially? Were there IWA?
Oh yeah,
crews?
IWA it came in, mainly it came in when I was right here in the bush in Lardeau. That's when the IWA first got formed, and they had odd little squabble and tough, but they never, we got along pretty good with the union. They had, like every place else, but things were pretty good in them days. I mean, a lot better than they are now. They could go for a better settlement and fine, but now they haven't got too leeway. The margin is so small now that if the union does any great demanding now, well, they're right out of the price of the world market completely. That's the sad part of it now. The union really needed the union for years. Now the unions got themselves worked up in such a high bracket that they don't know which way to look now when it comes to. They want more money instead of getting, like they used to, 75 or $1. Now they're lucky to get 2 or 3 cents.
What were the years that you were in Lardeau? At Marblehead, what years did that span?
Well, the years from in Marblehead, I'd say that I logged up in the Lardeau for around between 7 and 8 years, and other times I put in maybe a couple of months in Grohman Creek and a couple of months in Coffee Creek, and I put in the last year that I logged for Kootenay Forest, I supervised in Boundary. Just you couldn't in wintertime, you couldn't get there on it. You had to go down into the States and at Port Hill and cross the ferry there and then up to Boundary. But in the summertime, there was a skyway road from the skyway up here in the Selma Crescent cutoff. Well, there was a road you could go in up there, when the snow wasn't on. But that was no winter road in there. You had to go down the States to come back up. They had quite a holding in down there in Boundary at one time.
A big timber sale?
Yes, they were all timber sales. They never owned any. As far as, to my knowledge, I don't think Kootenay Forest ever owned any ground. They just timber rights. The timber sales that were put up for they bid on them. I don't know. I never went in on any of the bidding, but the engineers did that. but they would be Burns and one or two sawmills from Creston maybe, and Kootenay Forest, Burns, Kootenay Forest, maybe a few P&H from Caslow, and that would be bidding on different sales.
What year did you set up the repair shop down on the waterfront?
I set that up.
69, in May of
I was
69.
going to say 69.
May of 69.
69 and I sold out in 74.
So up until then, you had worked in a lot of camps, and
I worked for Kootenay Forest in every camp that they had. Yeah, they had.
From 50s, I guess, early 50s.
They had
about
some beautiful
68.
camps. When things were going good, it shows how an outfit operates. When the going was good, they built a camp in Grohman Creek, way up on top there, and it must have cost at that time, I'd say 500,000 or maybe more. And they wouldn't hire one man to go and shovel the snow off the building that's flat. The first winter was just as flat as that rug. There was nothing left of it. Flat right out. But I mean, in them days, like I say, there was lots of money to be made in logging.
were you there when the company changed from the Lutholds to
Yes.
Eddy Match?
Oh yes.
Well, tell me a bit about that.
Well, I mean, nothing changed except Luthold. He owned it. It was Reed Prentice. No. What the heck?
Glacier?
Glacier, yeah. I can never think of Glacier. When Glacier, I'm told, now this is hearsay, but I think it's true, it was owned by Patterson first. It was Patterson Lumber Company in Nelson here. Then it went, Luthold bought and was called it, I just said it now,
Glacier.
Glacier. And then when I was with them, when Luthold sold out to Eddy Match. Now you've heard of Eddy Match, and Eddy Match had a mill here. That's how they got started on Kootenay Forest. They had a mill down here, Powell Lumber.
Match block, wasn't it, Paul?
It was a match block outfit. That's Eddy Match, see. And they took out with horse logging all around this fellow by the name of Acadia. And he had logged all this area for white pine. He just went up and sneaked out the white pine and all around. If you ever traveled through the bush here a few years ago, his skid trails and the stumps of the pine were still there. He just went in and took out white pine all over. I don't think he had any timber sale at all except for just the white pine. But he sold that to Powell Lumber. Well, Powell Lumber was run by two men. They operated. Well, I think Elmer Horton did own it until Eddy Match bought it. But and Eddy Match, he run the mill. Him and his son Harry Horton, they run the Powell Lumber Company until they bought out Kootenay Forest. And once they bought out Kootenay Forest, they shut down the match factory completely because most of white pine was picked up out of the country at that time. So they shut down Powell and moved all the lumber out of there and smoothed everything all off, and they bought Kootenay Forest. See, that was Glacier at that time, and that's when it switched from Glacier to Kootenay Forest.
Did it change anything for you?
Didn't change hardly anything. As far as we were concerned in the bush, didn't change nothing. But it might in the sawmill, But they upgraded the sawmill every once in a while, but I didn't ever had much. They upgraded the dry kill and all the necessary things, but they didn't. As far as we're concerned out in the bush, we'd never know the difference because all we were doing was produce logs. And whether they was cutting one shift or two shifts or three shifts, it all depends on the market. But I do know for quite a few years that the Kootenay Fort really done good. When old Shukin and Vern Vance, and then Shukin retired, and Vern Vance took over as general manager, and there was 3 or 4 years, and they really was floating in clover. That was the heyday, just after fall on the tree, and say there's 8 feet of snow. You got to dig, so you'd maybe go down 5 feet, and you tramp it all down there, so you're within maybe 2 foot stump. But I mean, it's still, you can just see out of the hole, So you make 2 steps. You pack it all good there with the flat side of your axe, and pack it all down solid. You lay a snowshoe on that, you make 2 steps, and you're out. All the snowshoes for is you got to work on them. You can't walk from one to the other. You're up to your neck in snow, so you just pack it down and get a place for your getaway. That's all that amounts to is a getaway. The step is made there, and then you put the snowshoe on top of it, so when you jump on it quick, you don't break it down. Otherwise, if it breaks down, then you're right in the bite. That's why them 2 steps are necessary. With the snowshoe, you step onto the snowshoe. There, you don't take them with you. Once the tree is gone, well, then you just pick up your snowshoes, put them on, and you go to the next tree.
How were you paid as a faller?
That's contract. That was contract.
How was
so
it?
Much 1,000. If that tree had 1,000 feet in it, and if I got 350, 1,000, that's what I got for falling that tree. That's what it amounts to. Mm-hmm. If you're paid, we were paid strictly by the 1,000. If it wasn't too hard in them days. You could, if it was half decent timber, you could cut 20,000 without too much trouble.
How did they keep track if there was more than one faller on a?
They're all marked. You got a number on them on your logs, and there's a scaler scales your logs every day.
But they were waste. Were they not waste scaling?
I go out in the morning and I got 25 trees, and I go from 1 to 25 on the stumps. The scaler comes around at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and he picks up what fuel was left from yesterday, and then starts this morning, and he goes around, and if I got 80 logs, he scales them all. And if I cut 5 or 6 logs after he left, then you pick them up tomorrow morning, see.
And he was a licensed scaler?
Oh, yeah. All of them had government tickets. They were put in there by the government. They were hired by the company, but they had a government ticket.
Mm-hmm. So your pay depended on him?
Yeah.
Did that work all right?
Well, I mean, it worked good. That's like I said in the tape, that when I had my own outfit in Merritt, when the mill burnt down and broke us, I underskilled. I skilled myself. I skilled lots of logs. I could skill with them. I never had a government ticket. I've had government permits, but I mean, I could skill. That was board foot I'm talking about. That's what I'd done most of my work on. Later on, it turned to cubic. Now they're both thrown out. It's all done by weight. Mm-hmm. A load of logs just rolls on the scale and says, "Oh, you got 20,000, you got 25,000," and you're paid on the weight, because they know exactly what to weigh, see. So it's much simpler than what it used to be.
So they were scaling them in the bush?
Yeah, they were all scaled in the bush. And the company knew me good enough in Merritt that they took my scale. And like a fool, I underscaled because I wanted a nest egg. Instead of having a nest egg, I got, I lost $30,000 in Merritt alone out of that deal. Just on a scale alone.
When you first were working for Kootenay Forest Products, 1952, 1953, in there, how were they skidding? With horses or with small cats?
No, they were all skidding with cats. They never used horses. The only horses I know that was used in this country was Kootenay taking out the white pine. That was all done with horses. But Kootenay Forest had tractors, and if they didn't have enough tractors, they hired men that had cats, and they went in and logged on contract basis too, same as what we fell on. Like a fellow by the name of Gould, he owned a TD-14. The two Voikin brothers, they had two D6s. Them brothers worked together. They logged for Kootenay Forest for years. There's a lot of different contractors, but if you had the money, you bought a cat, and then you got a contract from Kootenay Forest to skid logs, well then where you went. The company had a faller out there, and you skidded the logs. That's all. They might have 1 million feet on the ground when you start to skid with the cat. I mean, most of the places they had 1 or 2 strips ahead all the time. The cats come in later on. They didn't. There was sometimes I've had when I was falling for Kootenay Forest. There was places I was only 3 days ahead of the cat. If I could fall 70, 80 logs a day or 100, and the cat could skid 100, well then I didn't gain much on him. But if it was bad ground and I could produce 80, 90 logs and he could only skid 50, well then I could run away. But good ground, one man he has to go his best leg to stay ahead of a cat. And good ground, bad ground, then it's sort of a different color. It's tough skidding and it's tough to fall too.
What was the best falling? Where did you make the most money for falling?
Well, believe it or not, when I fell, I told you I fell for 14 months and we averaged $1 million. That was no contract. That was day wages. Do you know what we got a day? We got $6 a day. That was our wages for when we fell that 1 million feet a month.
That was for
Bedell, Stewart, and Welch. And my partner got $6, and I got $6. And before we finished, we fell for a couple of years for him. But for the first 14 months, we only got $6. And later on, we got a 15-cent raise a day.
Well, what about around here, though? What if you thought about the different places that you've worked? What are the?
Well, the coast switched to day wages too. For a comparison now with the coast, what I was worked in 37, 38, and 39 on contract, there was no contract falling. Contract come in later on, but when I started out, it was strictly day wages, and that was $6 a day. That was the day rate when they come to Nelson here. When the union took over and they figured the men were working too hard for money they were making on contract, and they voted in to get a day wages. Well, they started out at 18 to 20 to $22 a day, and now on the coast they're getting $125 a day for doing what I used to do for $6. Now they're getting like I say, 125 in places. Maybe they're getting better on that now. But I mean, I know that. And it cost me, in them days, it cost me to get my car from Vancouver on the old steamships. It cost me $5 for my car and $1 for myself, which is $6. So I had to work a whole day to get across. Now they're crying about being big money to go to Vancouver Island. It costs $20, and the fellow can go out and he's making at least 125 day wages. So he can go off and on 5 times for 1 day's wages, and I could only go 1 time. So that's a comparison.
Did you fall a lot of spruce for KFP?
Which?
Spruce?
Spruce, yes. I fell quite a bit of spruce. Spruce, white pine, cedar, hemlock, a lot of cedar. I fell a lot of cedar for them too. But spruce spruce and hemlock up Grohman Creek. Cedar, a lot of cedar and hemlock in Coffee Creek, or in Crawford Bay. Coffee Creek was, well, it was a mixed up there. They had white pine, cedar, boundary. There was quite a little tamarack and hemlock.
Why did KFP operate in so many different areas at the same time?
Well, they had a sawmill that was turning out so many thousand feet a day, and they couldn't get enough timber off of one lot. Like in Lardeau, they logged mainly all together. Maybe 4 or 5 years that they logged, but they logged about 3 places in Lardeau. They just didn't have one outfit going. Then when one timber sale had been used up, was all gone, then they maybe had a timber sale in Crawford Bay come up. They had bid on and got, so they'd go into Crawford Bay with their crews. And it was just a matter of them having a faller, and then they had a contract skidder in there. They had maybe 2 guys with cats contracting taking the logs out. And maybe two they had one of them had a loader. Then maybe had one guy with a contract loader, and he would load the logs and take them right to the dump. Some of them, that's the way their contract from stump to dump. They maybe contract the skidding and the hauling. I maybe contract the falling. There's the odd contract taken that they done it all. They done the falling, the skidding, and hauling, but it was all done on contract. There's 1 or 2 or 3 contractors that used to, an awful lot of them used to, especially on the smaller limits. They would take right from stump, what they call from stump to dump. All 3, and they take the falling and the skidding and the hauling all at a price.
Did you work for some of the contractors when you were falling?
I did, yes, and I worked for, I liked it very much. That's when I was doing the fall, and that was mostly for contractors.
Not directly for the company?
KFP, I fell quite a bit for KFP too, straight for the company. And they just hired the cat. But then later on, before I quit, there was the odd time that I had a chance to fall maybe for an individual, but not too much. It was mostly for company that I done.
You said that your job was called bullbucker.
That was any time, and that all starts at the coast, but it carries in the interior too. See, the bullbucker is the guy who looks after the fallers.
Can you describe that job a little bit? What
Well,
the tasks were?
I said when I started out, remember I said that I had to run all the lines.
What do you mean, run the line?
Well, I put ribbon up. I put ribbon in. I'd maybe take out a good-sized chunk of timber, and I'd put ribbon up to the line, or the back line. It was all blazed. So I'd run a ribbon up, and on this side I might put you falling, and on the other side of the ribbon I have another faller. See, so each one of them had their own individual falling, and yours, if yours was half decent ground, you maybe done it for $2 a thousand, and if this guy had a canyon in there, it was maybe worth $2.50. You had to judge to set the prices of the strip by the condition of the ground, the lay of the ground, determine the lot on the price, and the size of the timber.
Did you do that just by looking it over?
Yeah, by going through it.
What did you look for? What were the things?
Well, I mean, if you had half decent ground and good timber, nice sized timber, well, you naturally wouldn't have to pay as much as some place that was straight up and down like that there, and maybe scrubby timber, where it maybe take 5 to the 1,000, and another guy get 2 to the 1,000. I mean, You just gotta. But I mean, if you've been in the game long enough, they don't. You know pretty well what. Because I fell lots of timber, and I fell on the best ground in the world, and I fell on the worst. And I know pretty well what the man could do in them days. Now it's a bird of a different color altogether. The union come in, they just cut so many logs, and they didn't give a hoot. That was it. But
did you have to teach some of the people how to fall as well?
You're not kidding. I broke in my 6 or 7 years first that I bullbucked for Kootenay Forest. I must have broken 50 men if I broke in one. And the odd one that I told to pick up his bag and get out of the bush before I packed him out, because I mean, if it's not their game, that's a hard game. You can tell pretty well if you watch a man if he has no idea what he's doing at all. You better tell him to get out and go for something else, because I don't want to kill him. So.
What were the signs of a good faller?
Well, I mean, you can it's just like any job. If you know the job, you can get an idea that the guy's going to grasp what you tell him. But if another guy, if he just don't grasp at all, then you're better off to tell him, well, you're kind of a misplaced person. You better go back to town and look for a job someplace besides the bush. I've done it with 2 or 3. And they come back later on and thank me for it, because, I know that they're going to kill themselves if I leave them go. I can't stay with them 8 hours straight every day, I mean, I don't mind hanging around them for the first couple of days to show them the ropes. And I'm telling you, there's some I broke in, they come back today and they still say, oh yeah, I know, you were the boy that showed us how to do it. But I mean, it's a hard game, and it's nothing to it like anything else. If you know all the angles, it's easy. But if you don't, it's not easy.
What's the toughest part of falling?
The toughest part is just the work. It's just the work. I'm telling you that when you go out, I'm talking about contract work where you go out. If you're on day work, what they are now, the guys, the last 2 years that I worked in the bush made me sick, because they didn't matter how good a man it was, the rest would just get after him and make him slow up. And if you got 40 logs a day, 20 in the morning and 20 in the afternoon, you were lucky. Well, I knew I could fall 20 logs. I did it many a time, contract myself, 20 logs in 1 hour. But I mean, they just cut so much for day wages, and that's it. No more. And that's what ruined the bush, as far as I'm concerned. Now they're in the interior here. There's places I'm sure they're back contracting, not day wages anymore. There's
what about
contract.
Getting the tree where you want it? That's important.
Yes, that's so part of the falling game. It all depends what kind of timber you're talking about. If you're talking about cedar, you can only put it one way, and that's the way it leans. All them wedges in the world won't do you any good.
Why?
Because it's the type of wood. If the cedar's got a little bit of a lean one way, and you try to pull it that way, and so you undercut it there, and it leans here, well, it'll just start to move a little bit, and then one bang like that there, and it'll go exactly where it leans. It's got no fiber on the wood, no fibers to pull it. Fir, white pine, fir, spruce, you can pull them all. They lean there, and you can wedge them over and pull them here. But not unless they're rotten. If they're rotten, they'll snap off too. But if they're good fir especially, you can pull them just about any place you want.
Could you judge the soundness of a tree before you started cutting?
Well, I mean, once you put the undercut in it, you've got a pretty good idea whether it's rotten or whether it's... So if there's a big rot spot on one side, you know you're not going to be able to hold it. It's going to go where it leans. That's a part of experience. I've got left in the odd tree where I figured that I put the undercut in, and my God, that was the only good wood in the whole tree, and it didn't show up, and I put the saw on the back, and it snap, crack, and the first thing you know is going exactly the opposite direction of what you expected.
What happens if it sits back on your saw?
Well, if it tips back on your saw, there's more than one saw been smashed up. I slapped out one saw in my life, but that's about all. Dropped on it. It caught me off guard. And it wasn't off guard, but the tree was rotten. And she come down on it, and I cut off what little good wood there was, and then it collapsed on it, on the blade of my saw, and flipped the saw right underneath, and then the darn thing went right on it, and I picked it up in the gunny sack. But you can't. That's one of those things that happens. The odd time.
What about barber chair? That's a term I've heard.
Well, if a tree barber chair is the most dangerous thing there is in the bush. If a barber chair is cedar bad for that. What they mean by barber chair, if you got a small undercut, it's bad for barber chair. If you put a little tiny undercut in it, and then you're cutting you get about, especially if the tree's got any lean, then when the tree starts to go, you still got that much wood in there that's not cut, see. And she splits up from that, because it's got the lean, it splits up, and when it goes up, it might go 10 feet up, it might go 40 feet up. On that sliver, there's so much wood. Cedar will go up, and it'll go up, and it'll shoot back, and it might come back 20 feet on that side, or come back straight over the stump, or it might come back on the left. You don't know which way it's going to go once it goes up. That it can light right on you.
That happened to you very often?
Not me, because I was taught when I first went to, you always, what they call, notch it. If it's got lean, you're afraid of it, and it's cedar, then you what they call side notch. You put the undercut in it, and to get as big as the secret of keeping it from a barber cut is a big undercut. You get a big enough undercut, and then you cut both sides. But, you take the saw, cut this side, go on the other side, and you leave a V in that, see? Then you start at the back and you cut on that V. And then she won't, it's the sapwood on the sides that splits it up, see? So these chainsaws, if you know how to handle them, they're a lot better for barber chairs than what the old crosscuts, because you couldn't cut fast. But you take a cedar, if you got to cut right, boy, you can just walk into that, you can cut it faster than it'll split, You can just stay right with her and just cut her right up until she'll break, see? Go. Shut her off. Let's face the facts. You talk about these people that are crying about Lazar Creek here now, and that's all malarkey. They don't know the score, or they would never say what they're doing or going out there, because they're kicking about clear cutting. Now, I'm not so foolish that I'm going to look you in the eye and tell you that the odd clear cutting or odd spot on a rock face on the right slope is not the best thing. But 90% of the places, clear cut is the only way. The mistake they made, they just gutted the timber. They talk about raping the old growth. That's all the company's done. For 100 years was raped the forest. They took on nothing but the best, and they burnt up the rest. There was no pulp mills. There was nothing to utilize that stuff that they pulled over with the high lead, and they never clear cut. There was no such a thing as clear cutting. They just clear burnt it. That's what they were doing. In the past is taking out the cream, pulling over everything else, or bulldozing it over, running over with cats, getting out the logs, then turn around in the forest and say, you've got a burner. If they didn't, the lightning would do it for them, so that they had to burn. So that was the sad mistake, see. if 50, 60 years ago, if they had the pulp mill and had the way to get rid of all what they call waste at that time, but today they find it's valuable timber, and we burnt it all up. So I mean, that was a mistake that they made. Now they've got pulp mills, and they can cut little trees like that, 4 or 5 inches on the stump. They're hauling them out, and they chip them all up and they ship them to the pulp mill. They don't waste nothing. That's the way it should be. Clear cut, everything, utilize everything. But no, you can't tell these guys. They don't know nothing about logging, that's why.
When you started around here, were they mostly diameter limit?
Oh, sure, they didn't want me to fall anything smaller than 15 inches on a stump. And they didn't want me to cut anything smaller than a 9-inch top. Then after I was going for a couple of years here, then the forester come in and said, you got to go down to 6 inches. So good clean timber, I cut it to 6 inches myself for my own benefit, and more so than the outfit. Because if it's a nice clean tree, but if it's a great big thing, nothing but one knot and one limb right on top of the other, what's the use of going to 6 inches? No good. The lumber's no good. But I used my head on that, and I went down to lots of places 12 inches on the stump. But the company belly ached about it. The company didn't want you to go under 15 or go under 9. But they didn't have gang saws, and they didn't have stuff they could cut 2 by 2 out of like they have today.
The company wanted large trees,
Oh,
large tops.
certainly, they wanted the cream it. They wanted the cream of the crop. And they did. They got it, too. And the sad part of it is, in places like Grohman Creek in them days, the hemlock was all rotten. Look at that, automatic doors here.
So leave it open or close
No, leave it. There was so much ring rot and spot rot in the hemlock, there was no hemlock logs practically in Grohman Creek. Very few. And so they all went to waste. But if it had been logging Grohman Creek today, all them logs, they all went to Salgar. See? They utilized them all. That's what it is. And they say, oh, these pulp mills. Oh, them pulp mills, they're the only thing as far as I'm concerned. There'll become a day when we just chop up everything and we'll make our boards. Because we can make them out of trees that big. And British Columbia, like I said before, there's millions of acres. And British Columbia is all timber, but it's not big timber, but it's still big enough to make nice chips out of. So instead of creaming it like they did in the past, I never forgive them for that. And of course, they were the biggest offenders in the world, and they pulled over everything, and they burnt up everything, and there's stumps and stumps for miles and miles, and they never planted the tree, and that's when they should have planted. If they'd have planted 50, 60 years ago, when I first come to the coast, they'd have been planting good. Today, them trees would be some of them 3 feet on the stump, because they got the water down there. We don't get it here like that. This summer's perfect in the interior for planting trees, but there's a lot of years we have it so hot here that you plant a tree and it'll die because it don't get enough moisture. But not at the coast. That's where they should have. That's where they made the arrow, but who am I to judge?
In your work, did you see much of the Forest Service, the forest rangers or assistant rangers?
Oh yes, they were wrong continually. The rangers. Continually, especially the last 7 or 8 years here, they were wrong continually. Yeah, and they were getting right after the companies to take the smaller tops and smaller butts. But I mean, the companies, like I say, there was no pulp mills in the country. Once the pulp mills come in, then that'd give them a chance to utilize the wood. Before that, they burned it up. They just burned up millions and millions of square feet, or board feet and cubic feet or weight or whatever you want it. I seen it go up and smoke so many all beautiful cedar butts. They might have a shell that wide on them.
A foot wide or 6 inches to a
thing from anything from 3 inches up is big enough. They can make a lot of lath out of that. You know, it takes a special mill, but it was there. But once they burn it up, it was gone. That's the sad part.
When the Forest Service people came to the sites, did they have much to do with you? Did they have much to do with your job?
Well, I mean, they didn't bother me too much. But when I was a foreman, well, then they could ask me if I was looking after the flowers, if they figured that there was too many big tops left or wasn't cutting the stumps low enough, or they'd get back, so they'd charge the company back. I mean, you had to watch and do your job and make sure that the boys done it right. But like I say, the clean cutting in them days, they didn't clean cut because there's no way to utilize it. Mm-hmm. Now they instead of leaving all these, I call them saplings, they cut them down. Otherwise, they were just pulled over with the cats or pulled over with equipment and then burnt up.
What about mark to cut or mark to leave? Did you work on many timber sales where they'd mark the trees?
In Merritt, I did.
Not about here.
Merritt, not here. Mm-hmm. Very little marked quarters in this. That was in the yellow pine, and in Merritt, they had a big X on any tree that had an X on. You didn't fall. We worked in quite a bit of marked timber on Merritt, but not here. Mm-hmm. No.